Guys, I really need to mention this sign that's behind me right here. Teach Me Anki is a company that I started that's out there to help medical students learn how to use Anki and integrate Anki into their studying. So if you're a student who wants to use flashcards, spaced repetition, who wants to use Anki but wants to maximize your effectiveness, go to teachmeanki.com, sign up for one of the master classes, and you'll meet with an expert one-on-one who will get you back on track or teach you everything that you need to know using Anki. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and get started here. Hey everyone, my name is Danny. I'm the host of the Medical School Podcast. Today I have a special guest, Dr. Omar Baqal, who is a resident physician at Mayo Clinic. And today we're going to talk about a lot of different things relevant for applying to residencies, specifically the ERAS application, how to make that stand out, and just how to maximize your ERAS application in general, as well as some mistakes to avoid. And also how to most effectively make a program list for yourself. And Dr. Baqal is an international medical graduate, is that right? So we're going to talk about some things that are going to be specific if you're an IMG as well, that are going to be really helpful for you. So thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks for the invitation. I think you've done a great job with the podcast. And, I do anticipate the podcast series is going to just keep growing as you add more and more content. And it was just my pleasure being here.
Yeah, well, I came across you because I came across your YouTube videos. And so if our listeners are looking for videos that are going to be super helpful for applying to residencies or especially if you're an IMG, filling out the ERAS application, which is actually how I found you because I was in the process of filling out my ERAS, the experiences section, and went on YouTube to look for some extra help and some tips, and I found just a great video on that. So if you guys are in that process, go ahead and check out, what's your YouTube channel called?
It's just my name. It's going to be Dr. Omar, O-M-A-R, and then my last name, Baqal, which is B-A-Q-A-L.
Okay.
So it's just as simple as that.
So what's your story up until now as far as, medical school, applying to residency, and now residency?
Well, so I'm originally from India, Kashmir, the Indian side of Kashmir. I was born in Saudi Arabia, and then I moved back to India for 7 years, then did my high school in Malaysia, and then went back to Saudi Arabia for med school. And I think we had a pretty solid support from the med school with regards to preparing for the match, exams, and research, and so on. So throughout med school, I was kind of involved in, I was really, I spent a lot of time within those circles of future planning, career guidance, and, preparing for the residency. I was leading these programs that would help students get research and clinical training in the US, just to help them get some research and clinical experience. And we put together this residency preparatory course back in med school, where we brought our graduates who had matched at very good places in the US, like Mayo, Cleveland, and so on. And they would come and give this 2-day course to students, planning to pursue this pathway, and that turned out to be a very beneficial experience. So I realized that, having been involved in that sphere already, I truly just wanted to continue on that even after I finished med school, moved on to residency, and that's where the YouTube channel came in. I felt like that was something I had been doing for a while and something I really wanted to continue doing, when it comes to mentorship and just really supporting people out there. We went through struggles. Our seniors went through even bigger struggles, and I feel like with every passing generation, we just want to try and make this whole process as easy, as accessible for people out there. And I just felt like it was probably the most natural thing to do, to share our experience and whatever we gained from our journey to residency with everyone out there going through the process.
Do you feel like there's anything, now looking back and being an IMG and having gone through that whole process, is there anything that maybe you would have done a little bit differently, or maybe something that you glad you did it a certain way? You feel like some advice you want to pass on to someone who might be in the situation you were in?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question, and I think I would have several different answers when it comes to that. The first thing is I am glad I stuck in. Last year was difficult. We came to a point where I was not sure if I'm going to apply to the match. Everything looked very uncertain. I was in Saudi Arabia, flights were canceled, electives were canceled, so I wasn't sure if I was going to get those, US electives or even the letters of recommendation from the US to be able to apply to the match. But I was like, no, I'm still gonna try and apply to the match this year,
Yeah.
whatever happens. And then, this ray of light came. My Mayo elective that was canceled before, they reoffered it to me. I was able to go through this.
Wow.
I had only one elective on my application, got the letters I needed from this one elective, and I applied for the match. That's one thing. So I think just not losing hope, and I'm glad I did that. Just kind of kept fighting, kept pushing. It's a very taxing, very difficult journey, and quite often you will feel, kind of on your knees and defeated and not sure whether you should just keep going. But I would say keep going.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I would have to say. Secondly, I am glad I networked. I cannot emphasize that enough.
How did you do that exactly? Because this is one thing where like people say when getting a residency depends a lot on who you know, and then I'm like thinking to myself like I don't know anyone, and I think a lot of students are like that. Like how do you get to know people along the way and make connections? What do you feel like are the best ways to do that?
I think there are a few ways to do that, and you just have to go all out when you're trying to network with people.
Yeah.
You're gonna find people. First of all, your seniors from med school. They must have matched at different places. Reach out to them for advice, and they, first of all, can put in a word for you, or they can connect you with people who might be truly instrumental when it comes to you getting interviews and so on. Second thing is LinkedIn. I made
interesting.
As much use of LinkedIn as possible. I think I'm probably more active on LinkedIn than I am on like Facebook or Instagram.
Wow.
That networking, I think, proved to be pretty key to me. I can say that I did get an interview or two from LinkedIn networking.
So LinkedIn, just networking, just reaching out to different faculty of programs or like program directors, or
Absolutely.
What did that usually look? Because I don't think I even have a LinkedIn account, right? So
I would say you have to get on it, as soon as possible. And it's not usually just the program directors. You can connect with residents, with fellows, and this extends really beyond residency. You're going to be reaching out to people who might potentially get you research projects you could work on and get publications. Now, people interested in fellowships and so on, that can prove to be very useful. And again, I've had several different research projects I've worked on that I got through my LinkedIn networking. So LinkedIn can be pretty useful,
Have you had much luck with Twitter as well? I know a lot of people use Twitter to network in medical school. Have you had any luck with that, or did you use that in the process?
It's a good question. There's a pretty robust medical community on Twitter. I personally haven't been that active. The pattern of activity I've seen on Twitter from the medical community is really just like sharing research findings, recent research studies, and so on.
Yeah.
I most recently did get involved in a research project through Twitter. I just direct messaged a certain faculty that has been very active in research, simply reached out to them, told them I'm interested, and I was able to get involved in research. But when it comes to residency, no, I did not really use Twitter during residency, particularly because I just wasn't very active. I didn't have a big kind of reach and audience.
I wish I would have used LinkedIn and Twitter when I was looking for research opportunities, because what I did is sort of just like look for opportunities through my school, but I noticed there wasn't a whole lot going on, and I was just sort of waiting for something to open up. And eventually I just thought, well, I'm just going to start my own thing. And that's what I which actually ended up working out. I got quite a bit of research experience and got some publications as well. But I didn't even think about reaching out to people on Twitter and LinkedIn and stuff. So I think that would have been helpful for sure. What about if you're an IMG and you're trying to get experiences in the U.S., clinical experiences, because I know these are highly valuable, especially if you want to end up, in a residency in the U.S. What are some things that you can do in that situation to get those experiences and then to maximize those experiences?
It's a pretty good question, Danny. I think overall it's been pretty difficult for students, whether U.S. or non-U.S. Students. with regards to doing rotations, away rotations, and cancellations, suspensions left and right. Things are kind of getting back on track, but it still is a very difficult situation overall. I can tell you, really potentially the biggest factor in my case, when it comes to matching at Mayo, was my clinical rotation that I did at Mayo.
Yeah.
That had several benefits that it gave me. First is I was able to get those much needed letters of recommendation that I needed. Secondly, I was able to work with the residents, the fellows that I am very certain gave direct feedback to the program about who I was as a person. I was also able to meet the program leadership and kind of have, you could think of it like an interview before the actual interview. You get me? So I think the benefits of doing rotations in places are far-reaching, especially when it comes to the top programs. They are more likely to, consider students who they've had experience with before.
Sure.
That includes students they might have rotated through them before. And when you have faculty putting in a word or putting in a good word and a recommendation for certain applicants, you can just imagine how that boosts their application. So that's one thing. Now, how you can make most of U.S. Clinical experience, first of all, just do your best, come out with guns blazing. You're here to get the job done. You're here to impress. So come prepared if you can. Do your best. I came in, I wouldn't say I had any extraordinary clinical knowledge or skills. I think it was just really being a good person, being a nice person, friendly with everyone, offering help where I can, using every opportunity to learn, just proactively learning, asking questions, answering questions. A lot of my answers were probably wrong, but I feel like a lot of my attendings really appreciated, my confidence in just being engaged in the discussion that was happening, trying to know my patients as well as possible. I think that was a big factor as well, because when you're doing rotations at a certain place as a final year med student, your comparison is an intern, first year resident. So they would want to see whether you are able to execute the responsibilities of a first year resident or not. And how do you match? Are you close at least? If you're close, pretty good enough for you to get those letters of recommendation. So again, just do your best, be nice, be proactive in your learning, and just, remain engaged.
How did you come up with, how did you decide which programs to apply to? Because like with internal medicine, I imagine there's hundreds of programs in the U.S. I don't know exactly how many. But how did you narrow it down, especially being a student who's an IMG? How did you narrow down, and how did you find the programs that you felt like were going to be most suitable for you? And how do you recommend other students do that?
I think that's a good question, Danny. And I have to mention, you may not know, but there is a pretty major difference in the number of programs that U.S. med students apply to and the number of programs that IMGs apply to. Give you an idea, I've heard numbers like 20, 30, 40 programs for U.S. students. IMGs apply to 250 programs.
Yeah, that's a lot of programs.
That is the reality.
Yep.
That is the reality of, what it's like to apply as an IMG to the match. And out of those 200, you probably get like 5 to 10-ish interviews.
Yeah.
So it's a very different dynamic. And that kind of explains what my approach was. I applied to 210 programs because that is just, the expected from for IMGs. But obviously there were programs that I had to exclude, which I just did not see myself in. I was more focused on, fellowship in cardiology. So that's one of the factors that kind of shaped my application. But again, as an IMG, you don't always enjoy the luxury of being very focused with the places you apply to. My advice usually for IMGs is applying broadly initially. Have a broad list of programs you apply to. And when it comes to ranking your programs for your rank list, then you can kind of take other factors into consideration. In my case, I kind of had to sit down with my wife and just really think about the interviews I had done, what my impression was from these interviews. Your interviews are going to give you a gut feeling of, about the program. You will know if the program feels right or not, and whether you see yourself fit in that program or not. The other factor is really the location. Is there a certain state or a city that you would prefer to be in? Do you have family nearby somewhere? So these are the factors. Just we have to keep in mind that you'll be training in the program, but you'll also be living in that city and that state for the next 3 years at least, if it's internal medicine. So I think all these factors put together, your preference for future training, your preference for residency training. Do you want to be more primary care focused, or do you want to have more specialized experience with your training, and then fellowships, your partner's preference, and you guys together kind of coming up with what's most important for you guys in the context of your circumstances. So all these things put together will give you a good idea of what programs you would prefer most.
Looking back, because you did you interview last cycle? So it was all the interviews were on Zoom, right? Were virtual interviews.
Yep.
Any advice for people interviewing this season, since this is like a new thing? Virtual interviews is pretty new, and obviously it's not like it used to be where we can go and fly out and see the places and see the things. Looking back, do you have any advice for students in this situation as far as knowing, I don't know, what to ask, what to do during their interviews, or how to set up their interviews? Anything like that come to mind?
Good question. I'll start off by saying that the big pro of the interviews being virtual is you save a ton of money.
Yeah.
You don't have to pay for flights. You don't have to pay for hotels, accommodation. So I think that was a big plus. Initially, there was that period of adjusting. This was something entirely different, not only for the applicants, but also for the program.
Yeah.
Everyone was adjusting to this totally new way of interviewing, and sometimes you run into logistical issues and technical problems and whatnot. But overall, I think the experience was pretty smooth and much better than what I would have expected initially.
Yeah.
At no point did I feel like I was limited, with how much I was able to express myself to the programs and express my interest and to be able to share my experiences with them. Obviously, you're not able to go in person and see the places for yourself. That's the drawback of virtual interviews. But overall, my advice would be to be yourself, be nice, and be natural. I think that served me best. I came to realize, as we went along the interview trail, that a lot of it is just so conversational. Programs are not really trying to put you on the spot and trying to interrogate you. It's really just for them to get to know you better as a person.
I was going to ask how often you came across questions, like situational questions, like tell me about a time when, X, Y, and Z sort of thing. Did you have any of those like sort of like trick questions or put you on the spot sort of questions like that?
Mm-hmm. There are some questions you should expect to be asked quite commonly. First one being just tell us about yourself. Yeah. It's one of the most common questions you'll get asked on the interviews. Second would be fellowship interests or like future planning. What's your plan for the future? Third, research. Sometimes they may pick, one of your publications or research experiences and tell you to just elaborate on that. Mm-hmm. Talking about situational or, scenario-based questions, I did get asked those questions. I wouldn't say very frequently, but I'd say maybe about half of my interviews I got asked, such questions in. Quite often there is no one right answer. It's really just for them to see how you think through a certain scenario, whether, if there's a scenario where you're in a difficult situation, they would want to hear that you are going to consult your senior. You're going to go talk to your senior first, stuff like that. There was only one interview that I had that asked me medical questions, like, okay, you have a patient coming in with back pain, so what kind of things are you thinking about? That is very unusual. But, situational questions might come by commonly, but nothing to stress over, nor is there anything to prepare for. Like, they are only meant to show them how you think, and you think how you think. You can't really try to script how you think. You just have to be in that situation and just let them know naturally what you would do in that situation. Keeping in mind, the qualities they would want you to have. They would want you to be aware of the hierarchy. They would want you to be safe. They would want you to be timely, friendly, considerate of your colleagues and stuff like that. So as long as your responses reflect those qualities, you should be fine.
I want to touch a little bit on ERAS applications, mostly because this was me, in this position of applying to residencies and filling out the ERAS, and coming across that awesome video, which again all the listeners should check out if you're in the process of filling out the ERAS. I know in the next few days is when the ERAS is going to open up to program directors. So we're all sort of like finishing up our applications right now. What are some of like the biggest mistakes you think students make with ERAS applications, and how would you correct those, or like what tips would you give for students?
It's a good question, and I almost review several applications every day, especially over the past few weeks with everyone working on their applications. And I would first of all advise people to look at their ERAS application from the perspective of a program director.
Yeah.
These are programs that receive 6,000 to 7,000 applications every season. That was the case last year at least. So make it as easy for them as possible to go through your experiences, and make sure that they're organized, easy to read, and your applications are just not overloaded with experiences. At some point, you need to prioritize what experiences you want to mention and which experiences you would want to exclude, because they don't add much value to your application. Because here's what happens when you add too many experiences to your application. There is a fear that will shift the focus away from your more important experiences to your less important experiences. And if the reader or your interviewer was to pick on your application and pick a certain experience for you to talk about, you would want to hope that they pick on something you're very passionate about, not something you did like pretty briefly, not weren't much involved in that. So for that reason, try to prioritize what you want to mention in your application. Don't mention too many things. Truly just kind of critique every single experience and see how it adds to your application. What benefit does it give to you in the context of you applying to residency, and in the context of the qualities the programs are looking for in you. That's one thing. Secondly, just keep it organized. I usually tell people to use a numbered list for the descriptions, because I just feel that makes it more readable, more organized instead of paragraphs. That's my personal preference. And every program director is a human with their preferences. Some might prefer paragraphs, some might prefer numbered lists. My preference and my recommendation usually is a numbered list, because to me it's easy to read.
Right. And then as far as like where's the line? Like if I'm a student, and maybe a student who doesn't have a lot of experiences, maybe they have like one or two major volunteer experiences, but then they have a bunch of little ones that were sort of like day-long experiences, right? Like, is it better to put sort of like fill your application with X number of experiences, or to have just a couple strong ones that you can talk about? Like, at what point do you decide, oh, I'm just going to put, these two strong ones, as opposed to putting the two strong experiences and adding the smaller ones? Does that make sense? That might be sort of a confusing question to ask.
I think that makes perfect sense. I think my recommendation would be that quality over quantity is probably key. It's, I think, of not much benefit if you have 10 volunteering experiences which are absolutely irrelevant, do not reflect at all your qualities or the qualities that the programs would want you to have, like leadership, clinical skills and knowledge, or meaningful involvements like community service and so on. If it's something absolutely irrelevant, even if you mention 10, I don't think it compensates for one or two strong, meaningful and impactful experiences. So I would say quality over quantity, and I think med students should keep that in mind when they're trying to get involved in different activities. They do need to think how it adds to their application. I think that was my my approach when I was in med school. I had pretty much no short-term volunteering on my application. Almost everything I put in there were year-long, 2-year-long commitments. Roles that I had in student committees, in the quality patient safety program at my med school. I was also a BLS course instructor at my med school.
Yeah.
So whenever I tried getting engaged in activities, I did introspect and think like, how does that benefit my application? And going down the line, when I mention this in my application, what does it reflect about me? So people need to understand that and prioritize accordingly what they want to mention in the application and what.
Do you meet with medical students? I mean, as part of like mentoring or anything like that?
So at Mayo, there have been a few IMGs who are research associates, research trainees right now at Mayo, and I actually did get to meet them. I sat down with them and just had a discussion about the challenges they were facing and what I could do to kind of support them through this journey. In addition to that, I am involved in mentoring a few applicants long term. It's like a commitment from both sides. We meet either virtually, actually virtually because they're in different parts of the country and in fact different parts of the world. We either have a phone call or a video call monthly to kind of catch up on the progress with their application and what kind of challenges they're facing. So these past few weeks have just been a process of just reviewing CVs, reviewing personal statements, see how they can make it better, how they can polish those documents further, and that's been a very fruitful experience and a very enjoyable experience for me, because I noticed about mentorship is that you can have a more meaningful impact when you are mentoring someone more long term.
Right.
People always ask for advice. I review, application CVs, a one-time thing, and they are on the way. But when you're able to mentor people over time, it's very satisfying to see the progress they slowly make as they work through each obstacle, each hurdle. And, I wouldn't do anything different.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again. And our listeners should definitely go and visit our Dr. Omar Baqal's YouTube channel and check out his videos on the application process and ERAS and personal statement and a bunch of great videos. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Danny. Good luck with the match, and I'm sure you'll do great.